there. I'm Jennifer Solt-Cerato, and I'm also Jenny from Jenny Sweets and More on First Street in Lehighton. And I was asked by the Lehighton Memorial Public Library to read a story to you today. As you can hear, we are here in this store, if you heard that motorcycle go by. But I was asked to read a story to you, and I wanted to read my favorite story from when I was your age. And it is called The Best Nest by P.D. Eastman. I liked reading stories like these because they taught me how to problem solve. And during the story, you're going to understand that Mr. and Mrs. Bird sure do have a problem that they need to solve. And the best nest, sometimes we have to learn that maybe the best isn't exactly what we need. And I think as we read the story, you'll understand that a little bit more. So let's get started and learn about Mr. and Mrs. Bird and their best nest. So first I'll start by saying that Mr. Bird doesn't have much of a singing voice. So when he sings, he kind of speaks his words. So Mr. Bird was happy. He was so happy he had to sing. And this was Mr. Bird's song. I love my house. I love my nest. In all the world, my nest is best. Then Mrs. Bird came out of the house. It's not the best nest, she said. I'm tired of this old place, said Mrs. Bird. I hate it. Let's look for a new place right now. So they left the old place to look for a new one. Well, this place looks nice, said Mr. Bird. Let's move in here. But somebody else had already moved in. So they looked at another house. This one looks nice, said Mr. Bird, and there's nobody in it. You're wrong, said Mrs. Bird. This house belongs to a foot. So they went on looking. I like this one, said Mr. Bird. It has a pretty red flag on the roof. I've always wanted a house with a flag, said Mrs. Bird. Maybe this place will be all right. But it wasn't all right. I guess I made a mistake, said Mr. Bird. You make too many mistakes, said Mrs. Bird. I'm going to pick the next house. And here it is, right here. They flew in. They looked around. Well, isn't it too big? Asked Mr. Bird. I like this big place, said Mrs. Bird. This is the place to build our new nest. They went right to work. They needed many things to build their new nest. First, they got some hay. They got some soda straws and broom straws. They got some sweater string. They got some stocking string and mattress stuffing. They got some horse hair. They got some man hair. Soon they had all the hay, all the straw, all the string, all the stuffing, all the horsehair, and all the man hair they could carry. They took it all back to build their nest. Mr. and Mrs. Bird worked very hard. It took them the rest of the morning to finish their nest. This nest is really the best, said Mrs. Bird. I want to stay here forever. Mr. Bird was very happy too. He flew to the top of his house. He sang his song again. I love our house. I love our nest. In all the world, our nest is best. He was so busy singing, he didn't even see Mr. Parker coming. You see, every day at 12 o'clock, Mr. Parker came to the church. Mr. Parker came to pull a rope. The rope went up to the bird's new nest. The rope rang the big bell right under Mrs. Bird's nest. Bong, bong, bong. Mrs. Bird got out of there as fast as she could fly. When Mr. Bird came in, all he could see was a mess of hay and string and stuffing and horsehair and man hair and straws. But where was Mrs. Bird? I will look for her until I find her, said Mr. Bird. He looked high. He looked low. He looked everywhere for Mrs. Bird. He looked down into a chimney, but Mrs. Bird wasn't there. He looked down into a water barrel, but Mrs. Bird wasn't there. Then he saw a big fat cat. There was a big fat smile on the fat cat's face. There were some pretty brown feathers near the fat cat's mouth. Mr. Bird began to cry. Oh dear, he cried. This big fat cat has eaten Mrs. Bird. Mr. Bird flew off. I'll never see Mrs. Bird again, he cried. It was getting dark. It began to rain. It rained harder and harder. Mr. Bird couldn't see where he was going. Crash! Mr. Bird bumped into something. It was his old house. That old house that Mrs. Bird hated. I'll go inside, said Mr. Bird. I'll rest here until the rain stops. Mr. Bird went in, and there was Mrs. Bird, sitting there singing. I love my house. I love my nest. In all the world, this nest is best. You? Here? Gasped Mr. Bird. I thought you hated this old nest. Mrs. Bird smiled. I used to hate it, she said, but a mother bird can change her mind, you see. There's no nest like an old nest for a brand new bird. And when the egg popped open, the new bird thought so too. The end. I hope you enjoyed this story and learning of the adventures of Mr. and Mrs. Bird and how the nest they hated ended up being the best nest for them after all. So I miss you all. I hope I get to see you all soon in the candy store. Take care and stay safe. Bye.